Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in November. So overall, November was a fantastic reading month. I started and completed a grand total of 6 books, though one of them I bled over into December by a couple of days. I've decided to go on ahead and review it in this video though, because first of all, I read the bulk of it in November, but also I want the book to be fresh in my mind, so I'm gonna go on ahead and tack it onto this month's wrap-up. So a grand total of 6 books. The ratings were pretty good. I had a 3-star, a 3.5 star, 3 4 stars, and 1 4.5 star. So pretty good ratings overall. As far as pages went, I read a grand total of 2,396 pages. As usual, I think I will start with the book that I liked the least and work my way up to the book that I liked the most, so we can end on a high note. So let's just jump right in and talk about everything I read in November. So first up, we have The Nirvana Effect by Brian Pinkerton. This is a sci-fi novel. It is a dystopian novel of the VR variety. Though I ended up giving this book 3 stars, I actually really enjoyed it. Though this was a really enjoyable read for me while I was reading it, I am already forgetting what it was really about. For me, that usually means no matter how much I enjoy reading a book, if I just instantly start to forget what it's about, it's probably going to be a 3-star book for me. This is a story about a future world in which this VR technology, very powerful VR technology, has kind of taken over. People are extremely addicted to it. Nothing is really happening in the real world anymore. People are just inside of their homes on this VR platform all of the time. And so this story follows, as most stories of this variety kind of do, a protagonist who is very much against this whole situation and is fighting to figure out a way to sort of overthrow it. What I really liked about this book is that the concept. I really like that concept. I generally really enjoy books that are, centered around virtual reality as sort of the plot device. I also really enjoyed the writing style. I thought that the author did a pretty good job writing this book. I would definitely pick up another book by this author. But yeah, like I said, it's just not particularly memorable. However, I would still definitely recommend this book if you like that concept as well. If anything that I've said about it sounds interesting to you, it is a worthwhile read. It's just not a very memorable one. Next up the list, we have got The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. This is maybe the 4th Stephen King book that I've read before. And I honestly have to say this one's probably kind of at the bottom. It was a little out there, I think, even for me. I don't know. I don't think this was a particularly shining moment for Stephen King, though I did enjoy this book. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. This is the story of a woman she lives out in the wilderness and on a very large piece of land. And one day she's out walking in the woods and stumbles over this metal protrusion sticking up out of the ground and starts to dig it up. The longer she works on digging it up, the more obsessed she becomes with it, and somehow it begins to influence her mind, not only her mind, but the minds of the people in the community around her in a very powerful and strange way. And then it just kind of goes from there. It's a kind of a convoluted path, but that's sort of how the whole thing gets kicked off. This book is definitely a product of the time it was written, which I believe it was written right in late 80s, early 90s. You could tell the period that it was written in, though it was still a pretty fun read, I would say, overall. And let me tell you, I was reading this book for nearly 2 weeks. This took up most of my month trying to read this. This is a crazy tome of a book. This book would have been far more enjoyable if it had been half, maybe even a third of the length that it is. I mean, unless you're pretty interested in reading Stephen King's entire catalog or something, I definitely wouldn't say to prioritize this one. Like I said, it's not his best as far as the ones that I've read. Still enjoyable, but just know that when you pick this book up, I'm guessing that you, much like me, will really have to take a lot of time to make your way through this. This is quite an experience to get through, so take that as you will. Next up, we have Sundial by Catriona Ward. This book was the November selection for my friend Leslie over at the Nerdy Narrative, her book club, the Wine and Crime Book Club, which I was really excited to join in on this one. This is a kind of thriller, horror-ish genre. It is a story of a woman who is in a very unhealthy marital relationship, has a couple of daughters who are very odd, let's say. One of her daughters begins acting out, and so she decides that her best course of action is to take this one daughter off to her childhood home out in the desert and do something with her that we're not sure why she thinks this is a good idea. But it is definitely very suspicious, I would say. It feels very suspicious, very intriguing. And this book is told in a couple of timelines: the present timeline of her and her daughter heading out to the desert, and also the past, her childhood and youth growing up out on this property. I don't want to say too much about this book, but because it has a lot of sort of twists and turns in it, and I don't want to ruin it. But I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really enjoyed this author's writing style. I haven't read just a ton of thrillers, but this was definitely unlike any that I'd ever read before, I think. I ended up being in a live discussion, which I'll link that discussion down in the video description box below if you would like to hear some more in-depth thoughts about that. It doesn't have the strongest horror elements, so if you kind of want to dip your toes a little bit into horror but are scared very easily, this one actually might be a pretty good choice for you. It has some sort of slashery qualities to it, but it's not like scary. So this is definitely something I would recommend for you if you're interested in that. I think the only thing that I wasn't terribly into about this book was the ending. It wasn't my favorite ending, but even at that, it was a fun read overall, and I would absolutely recommend it. Next up, we have Foe by Ian Reid. This is my second book by this author. The first one was I'm Thinking of Ending Things, a book that I loved up until the ending, the last 10% of the book, and then violently rejected it with the deepest part of my body. But fortunately, I did not feel that way about this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really, really liked this book. This is a story of a man and a woman, husband and wife. They live out on a farm, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And then one day, a man in a black suit from the city shows up at their house and tells them that the husband, Junior, has been selected for a very special program. And that he is going to go through all these tests to see if he's right for it. That is kind of all I want to say about this plot. If you read the synopsis, there isn't much more than that in the synopsis. This book is meant to be very cryptic. It really makes you feel, it's a quiet story, but it has a very eerie, transfixing quality to it. I think that Ian Reid really loves twist endings. Though the ending of this I also didn't totally love, and it wasn't that much of a surprise to me. It was miles better than I'm Thinking of Ending Things, but really the way this book is written, the feel of this book, I think is what made it such an enjoyable read. This book, it feels very unsettling. It almost feels like he was inspired by the writing style of maybe Shirley Jackson. And so it really worked for me. But yeah, I really liked this book. I think if you are a fan of Ian Reid to begin with, if you like his sort of way of unfolding a story, then you would very likely enjoy this one. Also, if you've never read any of his books, but you like books that are kind of maybe a little bit slower, but really set out an atmosphere of unease, this may really work for you. Next, we have The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Mistborn series, and this is also the book that I started in November, read about 2/3 of it in November, and finished up the last third in the beginning of December. This is definitely, I didn't want to wait to review this. I wanted to talk about this while it was fresh on my mind. I obviously can't go into too great of depth about what the story is, because it is the second in a series. However, if you're unfamiliar with the Mistborn series, this has a very interesting magic system. Not everyone in this world is capable of magic, but the people that are capable of it, they access this type of magic through consuming metals and burning metals. And various metals allow them a variety of abilities. And the most powerful of these individuals are the Mistborn, who can burn every kind of metal. The story follows a young woman named Vin, who in the very very beginning of the series in the first book, she's just a street urchin and discovers that she has this power. She has the ability to access these powers through burning metals. And it just sort of, the series is following her from the beginning point of that all the way up into, you know, growing to be a very powerful person within this kingdom. I have to say it kind of suffered a little bit from second book syndrome. While the first book was very action-packed and very exciting, this book had more to do with sort of politicking and a bit of a love story. So it wasn't as exciting as the first one was. It wasn't as exciting as I had hoped it was. That being said, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I really liked it a lot, and I will definitely continue on in the series. I'm very curious to see how this gets wrapped up. I love Brandon Sanderson's writing style. It's very accessible, especially for someone, I'm not just the biggest high fantasy reader, but I find his writing style to be very accessible, his characters to be well developed and interesting to read about. So yeah, I really like this book. I mean, if you haven't tried out the Mistborn series, I definitely recommend that you give it a shot, especially at least the first book. I didn't like it quite as much as this one, as quite as much as the first one, but still a great time. Absolutely recommend it. Last but not least, the book that I loved the most of everything I read in November, we have The Call by Peter O'Gan. This is a fantasy novel, and it is, I guess, technically categorized as a young adult fantasy novel. However, I cannot wrap my head around the fact that this is young adult. This is an incredibly dark story. If I had read this whenever I was a teenager, it genuinely would have freaked me out. Honestly, reading it as an adult, it kind of freaked me out. This is an Irish author. This book is set in Ireland, and it kind of has sort of an Irish folklore feel to it. I think a lot of the ideas and the inspiration for this author are from Irish folklore. This book is set in a world where the humans have had a huge falling out with the Fae, the fair folk, the fairies, whatever you want to call them, and have banished them to this sort of other world. They're taking revenge on the humans by trapping and killing their young people. Everyone in this society between the ages of 13 and 17 will at some point become abducted by these spirits. They wake up in this gray, washed out land, and they have to survive for 3 minutes. And if they can survive for 3 minutes, then they reappear back in their own world. I think it's like 90% of the people taken into this world are killed. And it is very, very brutal and graphic and horrifying. It is really horrifying. This is absolutely, like, I would call this a horror. I think the only thing that really makes this YA is that it is about young adults, but content-wise, this is for adults. This is an adult book. I absolutely loved this story. I will definitely be picking up more by this author. This is the first in the series, though I am a little nervous to continue in it. This was a nearly perfect book for me. I gave it 4.5 stars, but the second book in the series, it seems like the ratings aren't nearly as good, so that makes me nervous to read on. If you like really dramatically gritty, dark, unsettling, like weird folklore type stories. I don't know how, there's so many adjectives I could tack onto this. If anything that I have said about this book sounds interesting to you, I definitely recommend you pick it up. This book, it's only 300 pages. I read this in 2 sittings, which I recommend that you do. I think will be the most impacting that way. This was wonderful. Loved it. One of the best books that I've read in 2022 for sure. And yeah, I absolutely recommend it. All right, so that is it for me today. These are all of the books that I read in November, these as well as Sundial. I'd be very curious to know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them. Also, if you read anything interesting in November, I would absolutely love to talk to you about it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.